Okay. I will push the button again. So welcome to the Node.js Next 10 Mini Summit on TypeScript support. We'll follow the agenda. Well, we'll start out by discussing the agenda that we had in the issue, which I'll paste again for anybody who joined afterwards. If they can add themselves to the agenda or to the attendee list, that would be great. So I think we wanted to start with a little bit of an intro. So I'll ask people to jump in and sort of give a brief description of who they are and why they're interested in the topic that we're going to talk about today. I'll start. I'm guilty. Don't everybody speak at the same time. I know, Jacob, you were saying you would, so I'll let you start.
I think someone is actually talking. They're just very, very quiet. No?
I don't hear that. Does anybody else?
I heard it sound like someone was talking as well, so I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't know who it was, but I can start. I'm Jacob. I'm on the Node.js core team. Work primarily on ESM and loaders. That's me. How about Jeff? Oh no, he's eating a mango.
I'll go next.
Also,
go ahead.
I'm Jeffrey. I'm also on the core team. Also work on loaders. Also on the TSC.
Yeah, I'll go Michael Dawson on the, one of the collaborators on the technical steering committee as well, and just interested in, in helping to lead the Next 10 effort to say, like, let's identify the things we think are important, document what we should do, and then hopefully, lay the groundwork for what we need to move forward on.
I'm guilty. I think that I was the one that was quiet earlier. Probably my mic isn't working, so I'm using my phone mic. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm mostly a Node.js user, but I am one of the authors of the TC39 proposal for incorporating types into JavaScript. So that's my interest.
I guess I can go next. Andrew Bradley, the TS Node maintainer. So all of the work that TypeScript or that Node does to support the work that I do is super important. So I talk a ton to the loaders team as well. So if you might see me on those issues. I'll have to be silent for this, but thanks for hosting.
I'm Stephen Belanger. I work on Node core stuff in V8, and I'm at Datadog building diagnostics tools.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Sure. I'm Ethan. I'm working at Vercel on a bunch of stuff, but participate in a lot of Node community things. Part of OpenJS World, participating more in some of the TypeScript efforts. So here to help that conversation along.
And I'm Jake. I'm from Microsoft on the TypeScript team. I think that there's more than just me here, but everyone else I think is either asleep or sick. So
yeah, and I'm Wesley. I'm also on the TypeScript team.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I'm Steven. I work at Vercel and I've been a longtime user of TypeScript and Node.js. And I work on all kinds of things, but one of them relevant here would be Vercel CLI, and in particular Vercel Dev, which supports TypeScript.
I can go next. I'm a guy, was working from some of the early days on the modules work in Node. and also some of the original kind of loader designs that became the loader flag, and just hoping to bridge some of these discussions in terms of where things were and where they're going, and whatever input I can help provide.
I'm Dong Kang, and I'm maintaining a subship at the Vercel.
Anybody else?
Hello, is it working? My name is OJ. I'm working at Brainstorm as well, and I'm a service as a core team member as well as KDY does. So my main interest is the actual logistics of how can SWC help to implement it if it's needed.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, it sounds like we've probably covered everybody that wants to introduce themselves. So why don't we dive into the agenda? So what I put on the draft agenda is, I think from the earlier discussions, and my goal here is to let's discuss the agenda and figure out what we think should be on. But I started with a proposal to say we'll start about the requirements and desired UX. So I think the goal was to talk about where we want to get to without necessarily talking about implementation first. So that would be that first part. Have a brainstorm, hopefully come up with at least a few lines of documentation in terms of here's how we would see that looking. Then if we have time, maybe spend a little bit of time on implementation, just to, that's probably a longer discussion than we'll be able to contain, but we could start some of that and then reserve 10 minutes at the end to document next steps so that we have a good definition of that. Are there other things people think we should add to the agenda, or do that in a different order? Or just, what are people's thoughts on that and starting out that way? I see one thumbs up, two thumbs up, and silence I generally take as nobody's got another alternate suggestion or strong suggestion, so we'll move forward.
There are no objections.
Okay. So we will start out with requirements and desired UX brainstorm. I don't know if anybody has some, somebody wants to start out by sharing their view on what do we think it should look like. And I'm actually, there's one more person to promote. So is there somebody want to share their view of what we think we should work towards in Node in terms of the sort of high level UX, not the implementation necessarily?
Well, I can go over at the very least what has been discussed so far to give us a starting off point, and sort of the current state of things. Would that be helpful?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Let's if you can share what you think that the proposal might be, and then we can sort of discuss from there. That'd be great.
Okay. So currently, adding TypeScript or supporting TypeScript within Node itself is possible using an ESM loader, and it requires basically just a command line argument and something like a TS node. A TS node specifically has a loader that facilitates this. So you add it and it kind of just does its thing.
Here, if I can share something to illustrate. You're talking about this?
Let me make it bigger. Yes. Exactly. So currently the level of effort on the user side is basically non-existent. There is some, but not very much. The current request is how to eliminate the current level of effort so that it sort of just works. It may or may not use the current tooling, but basically they don't want to have the command line argument. I believe that is the gist of it.
Well, is that, I guess, does everyone else agree with that? Like, is the goal to make it easier than this, or is the goal something else?
I guess I'll try to communicate what my understanding of Mateo's goal was, that I share what that understanding was, which is being able to run node script.ts and have that run as types, like have it work as you would expect, and have nothing else. That is my understanding.
I think it's like without any extra steps necessarily, or being prompted for the simple step, which is like not necessarily that like we'd install or bundle all the pieces, but that if you tried to say node.ts test.ts, it would say please install ts node or whatever else, and then after you did that, it would just work.
So you'd still be able to run node script.ts, like assuming you had the things installed already, it would just work.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you saying that if you, for instance, already had TS Node installed, that Node would somehow know to use it without any kind of configuration at all?
Yes.
How?
I believe that was part of the original issue that was the one before that this issue came out of, which was the hooks, entry point hooks proposal. And my understanding of, and again, we have kind of moved on from that concept into, accepting that loaders will be this way. But my understanding of what the concept was there is Node will go look for the global TSC, or whatever TS node, and run that.
I think as the first step, we wanted to kind of stay away from the how necessarily, but I understand it's kind of like, if it's not possible, then it doesn't make sense. But like, just to say, we don't want to predefine the solution, but the goal is like, does that make any sense? So as it relates to that, it makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. I didn't mean like...
we don't want to like predefine the solution, but we should try and capture like some of the weaknesses of like the ideas that we've had so far. And, like this current way of like stuffing it in node options isn't going to work in a lot of environments. Like you can't do that on Lambda. There's lots of places that this just would not work at all.
Sorry, when I said how, I meant like if you're planning to use TS Node to facilitate this, or SWC or ES build or what have you, if there is no command line argument, how is Node supposed to know what you want to use? Is it supposed to just keep, are people thinking that Node will keep some kind of registry of all of the available options and prompt you? Or will it just pick one? Or is there actually some configuration somewhere that tells it? Like that definitely wouldn't be in TS Node or TS config.
To answer that, my understanding at the time when we were initially having these discussions was that it was Node would have an internal thing of like, if it's a .ts extension, this is what we do. And so like my guess would be the whatever is coming from TypeScript is the one that we do. Yeah.
I think Wesley has his hand up, and then I have something to respond to that.
I mean, I thought the assumption was that like there'd be a built-in prompt to say, hey, it looks like you're trying to do something that isn't supported like by default, but then whatever is implemented is general enough to do whatever with that input to like make it build. And specifically, there might be multiple options for that whatever, because if there's one thing I know as a TypeScript maintainer, there are actually many different flavors of TypeScript, and the one that runs in Node is just one of them. And well, there are actually multiple flavors that just run in Node, unfortunately.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say is like, let's not forget the other big part of Mateo's request was like, the specific desire not to bundle TypeScript with Node, like the way that like Dino does, for example. I think that would, if someone were to try to propose that, I think that would probably encounter a lot of headwinds from a lot of people that are part of the Node project. Like I know it's popular with Dino and Bun, but I think historically Node has like seen itself as like more of a server-side equivalent to browsers. So it's like, if a browser's not going to bundle TypeScript or support for it, I mean, unless Skill's, proposal gets through, but, short of that, we're more akin to being able to run what browsers can run. But even then we do beyond that. So maybe that's not such a purist statement.
And I also just want to clarify. I wasn't saying that we should bundle TypeScript with Node. I was still under the assumption that we're going to do the Node has an internal kind of like registry is a bad word, but it's the closest word I have. That like does a mapping from, okay, if this is a TS file, we do this thing, whatever this thing is.
Yeah. So just to summarize what was in this discussion, I think like, something that we certainly could do is something along the lines of print some kind of informative error message of like, oh, you tried to run a TS file, go to node.js/org/how to TypeScript or, whatever. And then that page could like give you lots of options and, these are the various things you can use for TypeScript or whatever else. I feel like that's something that like, at minimum we could do. Whatever we want to do beyond that, or once you know how to install those things to avoid muting a flag or needing node options, that's another thing we can discuss.
I see a number of hands up. So I see Zach, I think.
Yeah, I just had a very quick question for Wes. If you mentioned how there was many different flavors of TypeScript, if there was like a list somewhere that of those flavors, I'm just very quick question of curiosity.
So Wes, you've had your hand up. We might as well answer that. And
yeah, you can just check our compiler options reference. There's too many of them.
Oh, that's okay. I thought you meant like different like compilers and stuff like that.
No, I mean there are subtle differences between the syntax and stuff allowed between like SWC and the core TypeScript compiler and some other transpilers. Most of the differences are just around how resolution occurs, though. For example, all the bundlers that support TypeScript plugins that also ostensibly support node syntax support different subsets of the module resolution algorithm, or in many cases, different supersets. So the expectation of what you get when you actually execute TypeScript is not uniform, unfortunately.
So
but,
one sorry, go ahead.
What I wanted to point out is I feel like there's just like two core parts here, I guess. The first is just, printing something when you try and execute something with a TS extension, because Node by default does not support a TS extension. And whatever thing is printed should be helpful and generally indicate what you can do to make that work more, right? And the other thing is, whatever that is that works more, it would be nice if it was lower configuration than, like requiring node options and using a loader. For example, like the node options and loader method for tsnode/ESM, it doesn't actually even let you use a TypeScript REPL, for example, because there's no loader hook for a REPL, right? So like maybe there are other like more complete endpoints or like endpoints that wrap Node more completely that could also be useful, right?
Yeah, and I mean I think that's kind of what this comes down to, is adding more comprehensive customization hooks, and then if a user wants to opt in their Node runtime to load one implementation of those customization hooks by default, because that makes their life easier, then where does that configuration live?
I would also say, sorry, I'm interrupting in front of the line. I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, I was going to say Jake has had his hand up for a while. I'm going to go to Jake and then Mateo.
All I mainly wanted to also put out is just that, if I don't want to get too caught up on stuff like does Node have a hard coded list of like, oh, TS Node can handle the TS extension, but what about these other things? When this issue at the very bottom and in my brain also talks about the fact that it may be quite sufficient to just have package.json define that, like, if you'd like to run a TS file, you can do it by running this loader, right? So I think that, it's completely reasonable to do that. And it's, like if you're running Jest, you do the same thing. You can tell it, hey, when you're going to do a TS file, please do something. If you're doing Webpack, right? So I don't think it's unheard of to do those things. So I want to get caught up on a global list of, what about all these other cases? But a goal is definitely just so that we don't have to throw a giant list of environment variables down just to make our code work.
Yeah, I'd agree that we don't want to know about the options, but we want to let the different options be supported. But I'll go to Matteo, who has had his hand up next.
Hi everybody. Sorry, I kickstarted all this mess and then I was super late at some other meeting was ran super late. I'm so sorry. So there are a few fundamental parts that are problematic with this specific snippet that is being shared. Okay. The first one is it implies modules. I'm stating the obvious, but probably it implies that you're using ESM and you're transpiling as ESM. Not necessarily. The word is way bigger than that, unfortunately, at the minute. And the vast majority of TypeScript stuff is transpiled to CommonJS. And I want something that's useful for them right now and not something that's useful for them years. So I need that. Okay, I think that's one of the problems. And second, or it needs something that works for both. Okay, it's not, something that needs to work for both. Second, the use of node options is pretty bad. Like this is not. It's most people will. It's not very familiar for newbies to use and specify an export and stuff like that on Windows and so on, which is very popular, unfortunately, still. Doing all of that is not super easy. So, so loading it up from the package JSON is totally available. Originally, I thought we were searching automatically on node modules, but in fact, looking at some config on package JSON it's great. Okay, it's having a section saying, oh, you want to run this extension. This is the hook that is going to be used. Easy. Well, it's not easy to implement, but easy to do. Easy for people to say, okay, so I'm just going there and configure it, and then it will run. I think that will be phenomenally good from a developer perspective. I think that's the best we can achieve, more or less. So, yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Tierney, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I guess to one of the points that was made earlier, I would like to, and I think configuring through package JSON is fine. I would like to be able to download Node from nodejs.org and be able to run nodescript.ts. Happy to do like npm install whatever loader. Like basically I'm happy to do configuration and installation, the steps that everyone always does with every project. But yeah, I that is kind of the bar of I don't want to have to like do more than that, or I don't think, well, it's not that I don't want to. I don't think users should have to do more than that to get this running.
Andrew had his hand up next.
Oh, yeah, there was a mention of this snippet implying ESM, and I think it actually does. It works for CJS as well, due to hacks.
Oh, cool.
the loader API doesn't support that. But as I thought about bringing this up, maybe it just means we shouldn't be looking at this example, because I understand the loaders team desire to say, yes, we're making great progress towards this stuff. But also looking at a loader specific snippet is perhaps distracting from the higher level goals that we really should be focusing on.
Well, this is the status quo. That's why I think it's good to use as a starting point. Is like, this is how you could do this. The ask is possible today. It's just possible like this, which I understand is not, leaves a lot to be desired. So this is not the proposal of like, hey, the problem is solved, let's not do anything. It's more of like, we have a fallback of plan B, plan Z, and it's this. So it's like, whatever we build shouldn't get worse than this. So it's sort of a question of like, okay, so how would you want to make the experience better than what's here? That was the point of this.
Mateo probably had his hand up next.
So I have two things. One is back from Tierney. The reason why it's not possible to do, well, it's not recommended to do what you said, that somebody can just download Node, run an npm install, and just do node script.ts. It's because TypeScript is a multiverse. Okay, it's a multiverse of languages. All the there are more than 100 options in there. Each one of them can fundamentally alter the language of TypeScript. So all possible permutation of 100 different configs. Okay, this
and
is
all the versions of TypeScript.
And then all the versions of TypeScript, and then it's okay.
Can we not just do what TS Node does when you run it without a config file?
Sorry. What does TS Node do if you run it without a config file?
I don't know, but if it blows up or something, saying there's no config.
Well, it's not. It's down to the loader that we're going to use. Okay. What I mean is, if we download it and run it, whatever, the hook that's going to be there should guide people in creating a TS config file or something like that, so that it's important. Now, note that what Dino does is that it standardizes their TS config. Like, Dino does not support the multiverse of TypeScript. It supports one language. What they have decided, that's TypeScript, which is different than we don't want to block the innovation that the TypeScript team and everybody else wants to do. With TypeScript, a lot of people in Node use a lot of different flags. It's I know, because I have some of my modules need to support all of them. So, and it's actually quite a wild ride to support them all. There are a few competing options, which bar used to do certain things in your types. Anyway, that's my point on that.
So I'll let Tierney respond, and then I'm going to go to Daniel after that.
Yeah, I just have a quick response to that. In saying, like, I want to do an npm install, I guess that it's confusing to me that is like, the npm install is the installing whatever the TS thing I want is, right? So like, that's installing the example that's on the screen right now, TS Node /ESM loader. Or at least that's, I assume that's how you get that loader. I hope it is. Yeah, and so like, that theoretically shouldn't, and perhaps this creates more complexity for Node, but I could maybe use SWC/loader or whatever. And maybe we have a way to register that, like, adding the loader property in package JSON, and then having TypeScript : SWC/loader as the value, and that being like how you tell Node, you go look at this loader for this extension, or maybe TS, just to make it clear. But yeah, I don't think what you said is mutually exclusive. What I was thinking, and maybe I just communicated it poorly. But yeah, I agree with you for what it's worth.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Daniel.
Hi. If we're talking about compatibility across flavors, do people see the types as comments, typed annotations effort, articulating some small but growable subset as being relevant to this as defaults, possibly? Just two out there in the future.
Yes.
I can take it. This is like whatever happens at the runtime level, at the language level, it doesn't matter at this point. If you know the way the comments as type thing is being specified as being it's completely neutral. Okay, it's still a JavaScript file. So, and I'm not specifically talking about type checking it. Okay, like this is very important. I'm not, this thing is not about type checking. It's about running the code, which might involve some time checking beforehand, but that's not the fundamental goal of it. I hope I answered that, Daniel.
So basically, we're trying to do the type checking as well. That's part of the goals here, and types as comments just doesn't address that. Is that part of what you're saying?
It's the content. So it's the contrary. Type as comments, it's only for the type checking, and this is about running the code.
I think types as comments is all about just running the code and not doing type checking.
Yeah, yes. Well, it's about specifying types that are transparent when run.
These are also orthogonal issues, to use a TC39 word. This is about supporting TypeScript usage from Node, which is we see massive amounts of TypeScript usage in the ecosystem. This is not necessarily about getting types support in Node.
Yeah. I think I should let Roy jump in.
Yeah, I would just like to bring up because we discussed also supporting different versions, and I know there's a parallel discussion going on. We continue the discussion of vendoring packages in the tooling working group. We're discussing that, and maybe vendoring the loaders. And I know it might be a lot because there's a lot that goes along with that, but might be a kind of a solution to the multiple versions. Then we can say, okay, we support this version that is bundled along with this version of Node.js. So I'd just like to bring that to attention. Hasn't been mentioned yet.
Okay, I'm just going to go to Rob since he hasn't had a chance to talk yet.
Hey, hi, I'm Rob. But I've joined late, so I apologize if this is going back over anything. But I implemented TypeScript in a custom runtime that we have. So similar, like bringing these things together, and just kind of responding to Matteo with the point of TS config and the diversification there. We found that you can divide TS config into almost half, or as in you can split it into two categories. Some of the controls are about type checking, and at that point, each project wants different levels of strictness. Fine. The other set of options inside TS config are more about adapting TypeScript to the platform, to the runtime conventions and so on there. And for those, we found that locking them down in the way that Dino does is actually beneficial, because a lot of these don't need to vary for a given runtime platform. So obviously that's a lot easier to do when you own the platform and it's first party in-house, whereas we're dealing with a wide ecosystem. But I think that the Deno model there is actually quite good because Dino takes a layered approach. There are a core set of TS config options that you cannot override because they're considered to be inherent to the platform. And so you wouldn't want them to vary if a project is designed for the platform, but they do also provide overriding some of them as well. So that concept of having ones that don't make sense to vary versus the ones that are per project and that layering, I think there might be some value to that.
And then I think Andrew's had his hand up for quite a long time, so I think we should go to Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight in terms of what do we do when the user doesn't have a config file or stuff like that. Wesley pointed out the language service issue, and more broadly, the editor issue. When you're writing TypeScript, it's not just about what your command line does. It's about what your editor does. And if your editor is highlighting errors with certain expectations, one example would be one of the new JSX flags where it doesn't import from React, it imports from React-dev, I think. So just an example of your editor is going to make certain expectations around highlighting and stuff based on that, and Node should probably do the same thing. So if we lock down options, the question is, what does the editor do when it doesn't understand that we're using a lockdown set of defaults? It just sees there's no config file in the file system. I'm going to behave the way, the way that's supposed to be. So TSC sort of dictates some defaults there, and we should probably play along with that wherever appropriate.
Hey, and Wes has his hand up.
I mean, like, fundamentally, it feels like all that we really want here is the ability to install something either locally or globally that has the opportunity to intercept and either modify or override Node's command line execution. So, like, read the compiler options provided to Node and then either add more and execute normally or just outright intercept it in the case of wanting to provide, like, a different REPL. Because that is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about what Node does when you execute something on the command line. So that does feel like a pretty early entry point, but a potential entry point nonetheless. It's just you need a well-known place to install the hook, right?
Right, and I guess install it, like, from the example, it's possible to install some hooks, but do it in a way that has a better ergonomics than today, I think is what's been discussed.
Yeah, and extending on that slightly, I think there's like the better ergonomics come down is perhaps the part that we need to focus on most. Like, what is package JSON look like with this? I assume that is the only thing I've heard like consensus on in how we do this. So I just what I'm assuming we're gonna try to look at. But yeah, like figuring that stuff out, I think is and the other thing too is I don't think we want to do this for everything. I think we probably wanted, and this might be a controversial opinion, I don't know. I think we probably want to scope it down to a limited subset that we choose to support, and that subset can change over time. So like probably not going to choose CoffeeScript. Like probably not going to choose to do the work for that. But when I don't know, next script comes out or something in 3 years and then everyone adopts that, like supporting that when it hits a certain critical mass that I don't think we need to define. I think gut feeling, everyone agrees this is what everyone's using is a fine measure. But yeah, I think scoping it down to, for now, TypeScript is reasonable.
Okay, Jacob.
I think we don't necessarily need to do that. I think that should be if we can't find a robust solution, and I don't think we are at that bridge yet. Like if we go the package JSON route, I don't foresee a problem supporting any language, even something that only one person is using, as long as they follow whatever the mechanism that we provide under the hood, be it a loader and we just do the hookup for them. I don't see why we would need to shut the gate on them.
Yeah, I think that's a valid, that was what I was thinking as well. Like, I think we might get agreement that if we have to, limiting scope is okay, but we should, ideally the solution is we don't even care what's running. We just have the hooks and the ergonomics that let people plug in and achieve with, and once they do that, hopefully we don't know whether it's TypeScript, CoffeeScript or whatever, right? I think we've had,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I think from the perspective of the maintainers, it's like, you know, thinking about all these things about like, oh, well, you can, you know, you would pick half of the TS config options and lock them down, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you'd also have to make a decision about whether Node's going to check types on runtime or not, or, you know, you'd have to make all these decisions about how Node should run TypeScript. And inevitably there's going to be some subset of people who want the opposite. And then now you have to add configuration and so on. And like, I think from the perspective of a maintainer of Node, there's a lot that appeals to me of like, just give them some way of, you know, don't bundle this inside Node. Let them provide some, you know, let me make the experience as convenient as possible for users to essentially load a plugin, you know, on startup. That, and then they can do whatever they want. Like the sky's the limit. Like even CoffeeScript, whatever. Like then we just like wash our hands of it. We don't have to be involved. But then everything is possible and users can do whatever they want. I mean, I think the downside of that is that you don't quite get the experience of Dino, where like it's like download Dino, you know, Dino file.ts and it just runs. Yeah, we wouldn't be able to provide that. But I guess maybe that's the first decision to make of like, is that okay? I mean, it might have to be okay, because I don't know if you're going to get like agreement from the Node team to like bundle TypeScript and, you know, some set of configuration that is the approved bundled version. So hopefully it's okay that some amount of configuration is required.
Yeah, I think that, and that those could be two separate steps, even if there was a goal to get there, like providing the infrastructure that lets you do anything would be an easier, I think, to your point, step.
We could always do both, yes.
And then you could go another step that says, okay, well, given that generic framework, we're going to implement something on top of it, which gives you a default, right? So, I'll let Andrew step up. I think fairly soon we should get on to like maybe a little bit more conversation, but Andrew and Tierney both had their hand up, so I'll let you two go.
I was just going to take a stab at enumerating like the acceptance criteria. So it's like, we want loaders to expand to be customization hooks. That's great. So you can customize the runtime and it's not vendored. We want to opt in on a project local basis, probably the package JSON. And then we want to opt in on a global basis, basically configure the node executable on your path to somehow automatically. I think if we hit those three things and we don't violate any security expectations, that, you know, probably better experts are, you know.
If I could just interject really quick, if you go to Node.js/loaders, the README has basically like a roadmap, and many of the things you're talking about are on here. So just want to make sure people are aware of this, and like, yeah, you can open issues on this repo, open PRs against this roadmap, whatever. But a lot of the things people have discussed, like customizing the REPL and so on, is mentioned here. And then just one other really quick thing, there is a PR about this already open, and a related issue in Node.js/loaders about like, if we were to provide config via package.json, what would that look like? That's still in the very early stages of like being sketched out, but just wanted to let people know that that these exist.
Yeah, totally. Oh, never mind. Just wanted to echo what Jeffrey said, basically referring to, yes, it's the loaders team, but it's being expanded to customization hooks and it covers a lot of this. So yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead, Tierney.
To kind of respond to, I think, Jeffrey's point from 2 points, like what before Andrew talked. I don't remember who it was. I'm +1 to having it be totally configurable and like generic, as long as one, we have the time and energy to implement that, which in Node I'm always concerned about, because more and more we are not having people who are able to do this as, you know, part of their full-time job. And so I very concerned about that as time goes on. And as long as the DX isn't awful, Like that needs to be the primary result of this, I think. It needs to not be convoluted and extremely extra. And so yeah, that's kind of my primary concern here. Is it's much, and you know, this is a do it right versus get it done situation, where like doing it right is, I agree, having it be generic, and it's much easier to have better DX if you just get it done. And so like I just want to make sure we're getting the DX correct, because this is a feature that, you know, breeds that future innovation of like, you know, whatever, you know, next types or whatever comes up, ideally that would use this, and like we wouldn't have this kind of existing problem. But one of the other things I wanted to say is, or I guess ask, is couldn't, like, in this discussion about a default configuration, couldn't the loader just provide that? Like if we're loading a loader, or if we're pulling a loader from npm or from the registry or whatever, from your artifactory or whatever, couldn't the loader provide those defaults? I feel like that's a much better way than because since we're having people reach out to this loader.
I mean, I think that's already happening if you do in this version.
Yeah, and so I guess
yeah,
that's part of why I'm confused about why. That's part of why I'm confused about why, like, if we're going down this route, I'm confused about why we're feeling like Node needs to add this when we can just off put that to the loader itself and have,
I think,
you know,
if it became bundled into Node directly, we'd have to make a bunch of decisions about what that default should be. Whereas right now, those decisions are made by TS Node, and so they're outside of our scope.
And I think the path we are going down is do not bundle this into Node, which is fine. I'm very on board with that. I think having the loader choose the defaults and then also allow it to load a config itself, which should be irrelevant to us, like that should be invisible to Node as a project, is totally fine. And I think that is the better DX path that we should go down.
Right. Okay. So I'll let Matteo, I guess Matteo and Jake, and then I think we should move to trying to see if we can sort of summarize some of the discussion.
I'll pass. I'm good.
Okay, Jake.
I guess I have one question, which is we're busy looking at this snippet that is explicitly like do something to package JSON, and then we're talking about putting stuff in package JSON, and we got to put it somewhere, right? But I do know that the original issue basically didn't involve that. It was basically, I do some stuff, please install and then run node.ts. So are we saying that we don't really care about the condition of I don't have a package and I want to run TypeScript? Or are we content with, I mean, are we just content with saying you have to have a package to do this?
You need, sorry, yeah, if I can say, it's you need to have a package because you need to have a TS config file.
Okay. I'm just making sure.
I mean,
that,
the starting point is that you need to have
door.
Sorry, go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, that you could argue that problem is solved with something like TS Node. Like, if you just have a loose like script.ts floating around somewhere on your file system, you could run it via like TS Node space script.ts, or put a hash bang at the top of script.ts that's like whatever user bin env TS Node, and treat TS Node as the binary. You know, if it's sort of like this, it's like, is that enough, or do we need to improve the DX of that? If so, then it's sort of like, well, how would you want to be better than that? And maybe we do, but I feel like it's almost a whole separate use case that like we could kind of.
Yeah, I just wanted
to, but yeah,
you know, figure out where the line was being drawn. Because I mean, one could make the same argument and say like, well, okay, someone's writing all this stuff so that they can run the Node CLI to do this, when they could get effectively exactly what they want now by running ts-node and then their script, right? Like that's actually a thing you can already do. But if we're saying that that's not acceptable, then we want people to run Node directly and not have to think about it. You know, it's you know, that also involves the other case. So I just want to make sure we're actually drawing the line that says like, okay, yeah, it's got to be in a package. Sorry, right? Which is fine.
One thing I would like us to just consider, and this is like a longer term thing, but one thing that has come up somewhat, like, you know, every collaborator summit has been the concept of a node RC, and not saying that we should do that here, but just designing this so we're not potentially excluding that in the future, might be nice. So like being able to say node is going to use this loader in the node RC, and then that would solve that problem.
If I could just ask a question to the group, and if this is too off topic, then let me know. But that was kind of like, it's right, I have right here. That was like my main feedback about the idea of adding a loaders field to package.json was like, well, this is just like one bit of, you know, that's like one flag, you know, and Node has like 100 something flags. You know, we should probably design, if we're going to put configuration in package.json, it should probably be like all of, you know, if not all of configuration, as much as of Node's configuration as is feasible to support through a config file, or at the very least have a design that it could expand like beyond one. And also, I think it's a very, very common use case that people have different configurations of Node for like localhost versus hosted environment, or, you know, dev and prod, or, you know, multiple either environments or ways of running it. Like maybe you run it differently in a Lambda versus you know, Docker, or you know, whatever. And so we would need to define potentially multiple configurations that get attached to environments or conditions or something like that. That was just all kind of my opinion on this. Like, is that generally how other people feel? That certainly would increase the scope of, you know, supporting config in a package.json. Even if we do it piecemeal and add only one or two options at start and expand it gradually, just having a design that could potentially expand to most of them would raise the bar of getting the first one in. So there is that, but it would at least like give us the most leeway of supporting whatever people might want in the future. But I'm curious how people feel about it.
I see Wes has his hand up.
I guess the only weird thing about node options in a package JSON file versus a separate file is that options in a package JSON file seem to carry this implicit idea that they only apply for the execution of files and contents within the scope of that package. So like underneath that package JSON file until you encounter another package JSON file, which implies that like loaders you load would be scoped. Node options that were specified in there only apply to code within that folder. So on and so forth, which is like
that
maybe
was I think that was the intent of this,
which
this
is
version, yeah.
Maybe not necessarily true, or like rather that's really hard to do for some options, and so maybe not necessarily what you want. And so maybe you do just want a hierarchical RC file that, you know, has global options. That way you can, you know, have system options in your root folder, or, you know, project.
Sorry, let me back up a second. It's more that if you define options in this package.json, if you then run an entry point within the scope of this package.json, so like a file alongside this one or in a subfolder of this one where there's no other, like, you know, the same rules as the type field of package.json, where there's like a controlling package.json for a file. If that file is the entry point, when the node process starts for that entry point, it looks at the node config for in that controlling package.json. And that's it. Like this controls the entry point, or this controls the node process really, when the process is started from like the scope of this package. And that's it. Like other, you know, if there's other node config under node module /foo /package.json, none of that gets applied to anything. It's only about the node process for an entry point.
The way I'd look at it is like consider it like an npm-rc or get ignored, like in that vein, except you can also control it from package.json. Like package.json would be a peer. This is I avoid Babel as much as I can, but I'm pretty sure Babel does this too. Like you could do Babel options in Babel, either Babel RC or package
We
JSON.
looked at that, but it would be like prohibitively of a performance hit if hundreds of your dependencies were trying to reconfigure Node, etc.
I mean, that's just my point, though. Like package.json files are typically things that describe stuff that affect the package, but like node options affect like everything about the invocation that's happening with Node in a given folder, right? So like if I'm in a folder that has a package JSON and I execute script/a dot whatever, and in script folder there's another package JSON, that means there are one of two package JSONs you think might apply. And based on what you're describing, only one of the two would. Whereas with like most RC type files, it would be hierarchical all the way up and they would all be combined, right? So you would start in the script folder. If there's an RC file there, you would read it, add its options, go into your project folder. If there's an RC file there, read it, add its options, keep working your way out and up.
Well, that gets to the question of like, how do we design this? But like it doesn't have to be in package.json. It could be a separate file. It could have this behavior of being combined. I mean, these are all open questions. But like getting back to my question though, it's like, it does sound like you wouldn't want some field that's only for loaders. Like you would potentially want to be like controlling all of Node's options through a config file, like essentially what the Node options environment variable does as a file. Is that fair? Like, is that what people would want?
That's what I was thinking, is that it should really be a mapping from, say, extension to a set of options. And whatever those options may be, like we know that some of them could be loader options, which would enable, allow us to hook into some things, but like it shouldn't necessarily be tied down to any subset. It's just if we somehow find an entry for an extension and we're starting a file with that extension, we look up a set of arguments and we add them to what's used.
Well, I think it would probably have to be broader than extensions because you'd want like, different for dev and prod and stuff. But however we define it, it would still be more than just like what loaders to use. It would be potentially all the options.
Well, no, that's what I was trying to say. Like, it's whatever, like whatever you could specify in node options, for example, anything could be like, it would be equivalent to saying we're going to set a node options for you if we see this extension. So any node option that can be set, you could associate with an extension.
Yeah, but I think people would want to be able to run files differently in dev and prod, even for the same extension, like especially with like the JS extension or something.
That I could agree now, but then it comes down to like, should we actually try and bundle that all into one file? Like, how do you one file or have different files? And I think we're kind of saying the same thing, so I'm going to stop myself. Stephen, I think, had something going to add.
Yeah, there's like some discussions of like if there's no TS config, then just like it doesn't know what to do. But I'm kind of questioning whether like the presence of TS config is actually like in scope at all. Like, does that even matter? Like, can that not just be?
I mean, not if we don't bundle TypeScript into Node. If we don't bundle TypeScript into Node, then like whatever loader the user configures, whether it's TS Node or something else, can do whatever it wants with or without a TS config. Like it moves that outside of Node scope.
Yeah, we can leave it up to whatever loader to decide what it wants to do. All Node's responsibility needs to be is to load this thing, and it can do whatever it wants. If it needs to load a config file from somewhere, it can check and see, oh, there's no config file. I'm going to crash because I need this. Or it might provide sensible defaults. It's up to whatever loader thing has been like added. So I don't think TS config actually matters at all, really.
You mean TS config doesn't actually matter for like our purposes?
Yeah, from the perspective of Node, like we don't need to care about its existence. We just need to care about we load a thing that wants to do something to the code.
I guess I see Matteo has his hand up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that topic. You have the tsconf. We need to consider the fact that we need a tsconfig because that's the best way to run TypeScript. Okay, so running TypeScript without a tsconfig file, it's a subpar experience or some level of default. Now, you could install a opinionated TypeScript loader thingy that actually is configured so that you only run you only set it up and it has already a preset of TypeScript, but we should not dictate ourselves what, like, it's important to know that these needs to exist and somebody needs to make that decision. It might not be that we don't need to make that decision us. We shouldn't be us making that decision, but we should design our system so that it allow that decision to be made, and it works in a world where we are allowing people to make that decision, essentially. I hope it's clear, or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, just let the loader do whatever it needs to do. If it needs a TS config, it can go and load that. If like I can see like a lot of big companies would probably make their own custom loader thing that, like, Google always has their own like style stuff that we're gonna like bake all of this into like our own linter and our own like all these tools. So like I can see them having their own like TypeScript loader that's just, this is the blessed way to use TypeScript at Google, so install this loader, and it just works.
I'm gonna say if Rob and Andrew, the last two, then we should talk maybe a little bit about like specifically the DX if we can, because we've only got 20 minutes left. So Andrew, if you want to go ahead.
I just wanted to say that there was some talk of mapping from file extensions, and I think there are cases where that won't necessarily work. Just wanted to highlight that. It's a callback, so I don't think I should get into it now, but
I think that might be related. Like things within TypeScript that wouldn't work, or just more generally.
Yeah, I think, well, we're talking about the entry point having the TS extension, which is great for the common case of like I wrote a script with this extension, but there's also cases where you're running some other command line tool, but then the config file is written with that TS extension. Should we support that experience? Like you have a Webpack config file written with the TS extension, the entry point is going to be Webpack. And then depending on what kind of resolvers that we use, sometimes your import specifier is not going to not have an extension at all, or perhaps it's going to point to a package JSON, which then has a main field, which then points to something that doesn't have an extension. So there it's the case of the resolver is not even going to know to find a TS file until you've got those hooks installed. So sometimes gating these or triggering these things based on extension might not work in some of those cases.
Just to ask a clarifying question on your Webpack config, are you asking whether or not that will be unexpected for Webpack developers if it allows TypeScript, or?
I was thinking more that that Webpack developers would want to be able to write their Webpack config in TS.
Just for reference, Webpack and other tools already do this. Like they just go, hey, if you'd like to have webpack.config.ts, install TS Node, and then it does it. So
exactly.
It wouldn't be unexpected to want to do anything like this. I wasn't sure if you were saying you weren't sure if it existed or not. So
no, just highlighting it as a use case, because you're right, the tools do that, but it's a lot of duplicated effort. Every tool decides to support this in a different way, and every tool is inevitably hitting the issue where they want to support ESM and then are finding that they cannot get these hooks installed in process. They have to spawn out to a child process. So just an important use case for us to consider.
Jake, if you have examples of other tools solving a similar problem where it's like someone tries to run Webpack with the webpack.config.ts and then Webpack like prompts you what to do. That would be a great example.
Largely
to
that's
post on this.
documentation. But I'd have to go look it up. Maybe someone remembers faster than I can, but I believe that there's a popular config library that like you can just say that emulates this behavior, and it basically says that if you use this config library, then we're automatically going to support your config files for your, your cool dev project with a TS file because we've already implemented that support for you. I don't know that Webpack uses that library, but I know that other tools do.
I think I know what you're referring to, gulp.js/require, but choir spelled like church choir.
That might be one of them, but I don't know that it is.
Well, anyway,
because I don't think the gulp stack has
on
been
on the issue that this meeting got spawned from. If you know of other examples, Webpack, gulp, who knows what, yeah, please just put them in that issue because that would be really good to have of like prior art.
I can go figure out what those are. I'll move on now.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think at this point, it would be good to see if we can spend some of the remaining time to sort of write down a few lines of what the DX we think we should be targeting looks like. I did write very short, just from some of the discussion we've had, which is probably not it, but as a starting point. If people want to try, I don't know what the best way to do it, but like if we want to try, everybody has access to the doc. If you want to try editing that or what, I guess the very first thing is like, do we have agreement that it's a goal to say, hey, I start with a file extension. So I try and run node script.ts. It's going to echo a message that says, like, if we don't know what to do, it'll say, hey, here's what you need to go install.
So a question I have about that is that like one separate thing from the loaders then? Is that a separate discussion for the loaders discussion?
I think this is like, regardless of how we go further.
Yeah.
We could say, even if we did nothing else, we could actually have somebody say, like, and I think it might have been Jeffrey in the beginning, we could just say, you try and run something with an extension. We tell people we don't know how to run it now, but if you install, here's a link to go to that will tell you how to install everything.
Yeah. Okay.
And I could see in our context of like not limiting it, but not trying to cover everything, we could make a generic message that says, we don't know how to handle that particular file extension.
Unknown extension, go to node.js/unknown extension, whatever.
Right. And I think from our discussions here, we'd probably have consensus that we should have a more specific one for TypeScript, right? Because that's where we started. We want to say for TypeScript, we don't want just the generic one, go to the one that talks about TypeScript. I could be wrong on that. But that's the very first, like, would we want to just make it generic, or would a generic and a specific,
or at least generic?
Right. At least generic is the first step. I see Rob has his hand up.
Wes was first.
Okay, Wes, go ahead.
Right, like you could easily just start by adding a message that's just like, oh, you've included this file that looks like it's probably a TS file. Did you mean to npm install TS node? And that's literally just all it suggests. That's all most people would need.
If we're making the loaders part generic, I'd prefer that we also make the error message generic and then choose to build on top of that genericness for like specific use cases like TS node.
Yeah, and also we don't want to have quite a bus ratio. Like if Andrew gets hit by a bus and TS node stops existing, then we have to update node to like update our message.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying we should do a link, like node.js.org/a, like for a type.
Well, and then it could link to like all the TypeScript loaders that people have created, and people could issue people to add this list and whatnot.
Yeah, sorry, good.
Like idealistically, sure, but in reality, like the list isn't that large and it doesn't change that often. Like in TypeScript itself, we have errors when there are missing describe and it globals, and I think we only list Mocha and Jest as the likely things you want to install, because most people don't want to install anything else.
What you mean
But
they don't want
that's
to use Node's test module? We have describe init now.
Hey, it's brand new.
It
Give it a
is.
minute.
It's brand new. Yeah.
It's brand new,
Sorry.
and if you have Node's types installed, you'll have the types for that installed too, and you won't get the suggestion.
But I think this is where we can easily get into a long discussion. And so maybe
I don't think we need to
Point to
settle the specifics of the error message right now.
yeah,
You know,
but like agreeing that at very least we can point to a page on the Node.js project with instruction, that's neutral. And I don't think we'll get into that long discussion of which ones have to be there or not. We can defer that. So that's why I'd propose we have if you run it, you get either the generic message or a specific one for TypeScript to start with, and it'll point to a page somewhere in the Node.js project, which can then have more details for both cases. Does that sound reasonable to people?
Yes, especially
that's also
because it's
something we
easy
could
to do.
implement like immediately. So
Right.
as long as if step 2 is the config file thing, then that'll take a while. But the error message we can do fast.
Yeah. Rob, you have your hand up.
Yes. So on this subject of kind of like allowing all the marketplace of loaders and directing people, maybe we can start with that being like generic and and fuzzy. But I think ultimately what is beneficial for the ecosystem is and what people really want is really for it just to work. Like I don't think there are many people that are trying to reconfigure like Deno's loader and so on, I'm talking specifically for the TypeScript users. So ultimately, I think if we can be opinionated about at least which one we endorse and rally around one, that is kind of necessary for ecosystem coherence, because these packages have to work with each other, for TypeScript at least.
I know as long as they work with us, that's all I really care about. And I don't want to be building and rebuilding this every time some new TypeScript comes along. So I'm kind of on the build it and they will come kind of front. Like, this is what it looks like. Here's how it works. If you want it, here it is.
I don't think that's what Rob's saying. I could be wrong, but I think Rob's more saying we endorse the official TypeScript loader as the loader you should use with Node.
Yeah, but I don't think there isn't TS Node is the official. That's not like published by Microsoft or something.
I think we could get in a really long discussion about this. I think the point is that adding an opinion can be valuable, but I don't think we're going to agree on whether we should choose an opinion or not, or what that opinion would be. But I think that should be on our agenda as like next steps. I think it can hopefully be this like, I wouldn't want to tie that to like doing a concrete step, which, as Jeffrey said, like this thing that's written down here, we could do today and takes a step in the right direction. If that later is changed to say, and here's our opinion at the very top of the one, that's a future I could see. But I think we should defer that to a different discussion if people agree with that. I'll take it down as a note. Like definitely like, can we provide a more opinionated option in the future?
Phase 2 for instructions. Yeah.
Right.
I think in line with that, it's like, we will provide one as an example, but like we can be clear that it works with, and then like, or plug in your own as long as it satisfies these conditions, and that would be, efficient enough, I imagine, for many people.
Right. Okay, so again, because we're down to 9 minutes, it sounds like we've got reasonable consensus around like what happens when you don't have something plugged in. So now if we want to go to the next step where it's like, okay, we've given your message, you go and you do the install, what happens? And what I've written down, and I know there's concerns about extension, but like somehow we need to map what you've installed to what you're trying to run. I was thinking we started out with like node script.ts. So in that case, it would be like, we run a file with an extension, we can somehow find a mapping for that extension, and we apply a set of options for you automatically based on that extension. does that, I mean, and then it runs. So I think like in this case, the mention was, well, no, having to set node options is hard, it's finicky or whatever, but if there was just a mapping that said, yeah, it's TS, here's the set of extensions, that would make sense. Does that fit with what people think? I guess Wes has
I don't
his
think
hand
it
up.
should be, I don't think it should be tied to an extension, but it should
It's
like
the question is more
Go
like,
ahead, Wes.
why does it need to be extension based? The idea is generally if you install something in the right place, then it should be hooked in, right? Like that should be all you need to do, I would assume. Like there's no need to configure anything on a per extension basis if the thing you've installed handles the stuff that you want, right?
Okay.
That I'm very confused by, but
well, I
okay.
think his point is like the loader may be able to say, oh, you're running a file that has a TS and do the right thing. So if you installed the loader,
that's
right,
fair.
okay.
Yes, the loader can hook into the extensions, and that allows like MTS and what all the variants the TS now supports. Okay, yeah, no, that's fair.
Okay, so it's basically that what we want to say is, you know, that you configure.
I think I can describe it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's what Antoine has in that PR, just for beyond loader. Like here's the Antoine's PR. It's essentially like for any entry point run in this folder or like controlled by this package.json, where the nearest parent package.json is the one with this configuration. When you run an entry point under this package scope, here's the configuration that Node should run for that entry point. I think that's what he's intending there.
In
but then we
talking
have to
about
expand that somehow to like cover like the dev and prod case and so on.
In talking about config in DX though, like node entry point config is way too dense of a name for that. Like that is a very that's not a good path for
whatever
DX.
it doesn't. Whatever we call the name is not. We don't need to worry about that right now. But but that would be the UX, I guess. And then if you need a different config for different entry points, like you have you know, server and client code in the same folder or something like that, that you would just have to you would have to like split them into subfolders with different package.json files, or use node flags to be like load this configuration versus that one or something like that.
Or just write a loader that glues the two that you're using together.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, once you're attaching a loader, then it can do whatever it wants to mix and match configuration, etc. Well, I guess maybe not, because the problem is that like Node's already running by that point. Like that's what makes it so difficult, is that like it's, you know, it's stuff that needs to be pulled into Node very early in Node's startup, like before it ever can like parse a JavaScript file. So that's what makes this difficult.
So is in the one-liner, is it basically we start a file regardless of what it is, it finds the package JSON in scope and applies a set of node options based on what's specified in that package JSON?
Essentially, yeah. And maybe if you want the non-default, like if you're not using, if you want like say the dev config, then you'd have to define that somehow, maybe a flag, I don't know. But we would have to figure that out.
I'm not convinced of that flow, but yeah, we can probably work action it. There's not much time, so we can probably action it on GitHub, because I was thinking, like if we loaded them from package.json, like if we have generic node options, okay, and we always need to look for a package.json, we have essentially slowed down startup.
Yep.
And
but we always
also,
look for package.json anyway for any ESM entry, so it's really not any slower than if you're using
okay,
SM.
so we are already looking for it, so that's fine. If we are already looking for it, then it's not a problem. So forget about my.
Yeah, and we could generalize.
That was why Antoine picked package.json rather than a new file. I mean, the other thing is like you're only looking for it once, just for the entry point. So it's like, even if we made it as a like node options.json or whatever, it's a very minor hit to, because it's only just for the entry point. It's not like right now we're looking for the controlling package.json for every single file you load across your entire tree, like even inside node modules and so on. So, we're already loading tens of thousands of files. Loading just one more is not much of a hit. But yeah.
I think at the high level, we could then describe it instead of like, we start a file with Node, then we basically find a file, find a config file in scope, apply the node option specified with the note that package.json is a good candidate for the config file.
Yeah, and a note that we need to handle different environments somehow.
Right.
If we don't design this from the start to support like prod versus dev, we're going to be screwed, because that's going to be like the first thing people ask. And
right. Okay, I'm taking that note.
That would, sorry, no, I'm big objection on that. We should not have any of that knowledge.
I think by definition, node options are different in development than prod. Like you might have -- inspect all the time in dev, and you would never want that in prod. So like we just have to provide a way for people to have different options in different environments. Yeah, enable source
I think
maps,
it's
as Wes puts.
Like it might be an argument against package.json in that case, right? Like something more like the RC file would make sense. More like
maybe
that seems like a natural fit for you. You have an RC file in your GitHub repo, and you might have a different one you overlay for prod or for tests versus overlaying the package JSON with different versions. I'm not as sure as, I don't know.
I mean, we can work out the details, but
yeah.
I think we need to include the requirement as part of the, this is a design requirement.
The problem with the environment is that whatever mechanism we use to set the environment then becomes a standard, and then we are back into the node_nav problem.
Well, we have a -- conditions flag right now that's already part of Node. So I was kind of imagining we would probably tie into that somehow, where like the default is production. If it's not specified, there is a default, and the default is production, and that's like, what's in package.json or something. But it's like if you're run with -- conditions or conditions, I forget if it's plural, like conditions equal dev, it somehow knows to load a different config, either a different config file or a different config block within the file or something.
I think what's still to be figured out is like, does it actually have to be Node understanding that there's those different options, or have the approach support people putting in different files in those environments? But I think we could agree that we need to think about that situation and how it should be handled.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could leave the specifics of how to handle that for, when we design it. But as long as we agree that that's something we need to, a case we need to cover.
Okay, so we're actually at time. So this is what I've written down in terms of the DX so far. Maybe I should add before.
Do you want to just screen share it for anyone that might watch?
Sure. Recording? Yeah. Okay. That's probably the easier. Okay.
Maybe first, when at the end where you say different environments, you might say different environments / conditions, because that's the feature in Node that
sure
is more. Because I think we've been trying to deprecate Node end, as Mateo was saying. But yeah, I think this is a good starting point, and nothing here stops us from bundling TypeScript in the future or being more opinionated about the flow that people should use, et cetera, et cetera. This would work for CommonJS as well as ESM. So I think we've covered all of the use cases that have been discussed, other than the fact that like this is even more steps than the snippet that we started with at the start of this. But even that can be automated somehow. Like you can, maybe our instructions could be like run npx TypeScript init or whatever, and it creates the config block or something like that.
Well, you can also set up your own init options to like do this by default, right? So if that's something you care about, like you can do that.
Yeah, like I don't know if do we want to include this in the list of like, get people's, well, or maybe that could just be a future improvement. Once we give the instructions, automating the instructions could be a later improvement, but that I just thought it was worth pointing out that this is an even longer series of steps than what people have now. So
but I think these steps are all meant to happen. So in one case, if you start it and it's not installed, you're just going to get a message. In the other case, you start it, and if you've done the install, it just runs.
Right.
So you don't actually have to set the
I mean, I guess
environment.
it's just a question of like, yeah, maybe let's just build the feature first, and then building the automation for making it faster to get set up could be a later improvement. And there could be lots of different ways to do that. It could be npm init or within Node, who knows what. But we can do that for later.
Because it supports any different tools and whatever, it's probably that's going to be different for any one of those. But you're right, we could optimize like TypeScript as one that we think is important without excluding the others, right?
Yeah, like I could easily imagine like npm init -- TypeScript, and it just like, when it's creating that package of JSON, it just includes some opinionated config block for like what would be an opinionated default, config for TypeScript with a TypeScript loader, etc.
Yep.
So like this is all well and good for like scripts and applications and that kind of stuff, but like a philosophical question that I just want people to think about is like how can you support this and then at the same time discourage people from shipping libraries that only contain TypeScript source code?
I think that's a question of like, how does something like TS Node work for dependencies? Like, does TS Node, I guess it probably does, automatically tries to transpile everything under node modules all throughout your module graph?
Right, like most loaders, it'll go for anything and everything that looks like it needs to handle, right? And so like if somebody has a library that's only written in TypeScript, it'll load it because it was written in TypeScript, right?
We actually we avoid that by default, but I think maybe it's a distraction from your point about encouraging pre-compilation.
Right. It's just this is maybe more of like the broader concern about like how publishing practices to npm and other registries works. But like when we're talking about this process, we're essentially taking someone's build pipeline and running it for them when they run their application, right? But when you ship a library, there's no blessed or like taken for granted build step. When you ship a library to npm, you have to explicitly build something, right? And so maybe that's another thing that you should consider when you're considering like all of this like enhanced entry point stuff.
I mean,
the preparation packages that should be implicit as well.
I feel like let's wait to see if that's a problem before because like I feel like a lot of people would complain about such a package because it's like not just that it's hard to run the code, but also that like, well, you just ship TS files. How am I supposed to know what TS config to use with them? I mean, like it's just so annoying to deal with that I feel like they would get so many complaints from users that they would be.
I mean, that's why I bring it up. We already get complaints with users because there are packages that do this by mistake already, even though Node doesn't support executing TypeScript like in any way except through like TS Node or something. Like people like do it because they think it'll be cool or a good idea. And when you like ship a feature like this, you lead people to believe that it'll be supported like more by the runtime, and it might very well be supported by whatever loader you're using, but that has many downsides, and so that's why it's one of those things that you probably want to discourage in some way or provide like a good
I
alternative.
mean, we could
to.
always discourage it in the documentation at the very least, but you know, I
Also,
would say
wouldn't that
like,
be up to the loader again? Like the loader can choose to not run not
Right.
do node modules, and like that is a loader choice, not Node's choice.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
I mean, and do we want to discourage it? Like maybe someone really does want to, you know, like people have talked about like, oh, I want to have only ESM files in my whole module graph. So like, give me some way to exclude CommonJS files from node modules and transitive dependencies, etc. Like maybe there's someone out there who really wants 100% TypeScript, even, you know, even including their node modules. And, you know, I mean, ideally, I think at least like packages that ship TypeScript should ship JavaScript as well. But, you know, that feels like not our problem. Like maybe NPM could do some kind of check during NPM publish that like, oh, you're not publishing any JavaScript files. You should, you know, did you mean to do that? Or, you know, I don't know.
Right, like what I just wanted to bring up is that there's a certain symmetry between like this like options loading and like preparation for publishing, right? They're both things that describe how you want something to be executed. And in the case of publishing, you want something to be prepared for execution later, whereas in the case of the immediate execution of Node, you want it to be executed right now, right? And so there are parallels between the two.
Yeah.
I wonder if another way to think about that is like just think about the user experience of someone who wants to run their TS directly in dev and wants to pre-compile for publication. And what does that developer experience look like for them? Because if they have a package JSON exports config with hard-coded paths that end in .js, that's good. That's what they should be doing for Node. But it means you've got a module specifier that ends in .js. But in dev, you want that to work correctly. So you want that to map to the TS file. What does that mean in terms of draping behavior off a file extension? The loader has to be eagerly loaded so that it can do that mapping, stuff like that. So I think similar to how we plan for users to be using a language service that is outside of Node's control, we can also plan for users to be pre-compiling, and that can help drive design decisions.
Also,
we are also in excess of time, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay.
We are at time. So I guess it's, you know, I don't have a hard stop, but we should figure out like, okay, so if this is like, do we have consensus here? The next step is like, I could take an action to PR that into, we have like our maintaining types support, like basically try and capture it somewhere where we can have broader collaborator input as well. And then I guess like there's also, as Jeffrey mentioned, some existing issues and stuff where the discussions can continue. Is there anything else we should do directly as next steps out of here? I guess.
Well, should we start actioning any of these things, like that error message thing, and creating a page on Node, like Node .org, Node.js.org?
Yep.
We can do right now. And
yeah, maybe that's like Charlie, 2 PRs, one for the page and one for the error, and we can maybe start with the page.
Yep.
Yeah.
For PR into the display to return error. That makes sense because yeah, that
error with link to the page. Yeah.
Who handles the Node.js org site? I know there's 2 now, right? There's a
repo. The .dev one is like a potential work in progress one that may or may not ship, the Node.js.org repo in the Node.js org. That's not confusing at all. Node.js/Node.js.org is the correct place. I would recommend we do some kind of, this is a problem I see a lot, is people doing a link that is embedded forever and then it not having the ability to change that link later. So having some kind of redirect for this, like a simple redirect, would be very smart, I think. But yeah, that's the repo.
I guess like we really have two, from my perspective, two choices, either there on nodejs.org or in our GitHub repo somewhere.
I think
I would not
Node.js
hard code. I would not hard code a GitHub URL. Let's not do that. Let's even if the link, even if the
we can deal with the specifics of this later as part of the PR.
Yeah.
Do we need to give a team a heads up? Are we going to drop a PR on them and they'll be like, "What are you doing?"
No, it'll be fine.
Okay.
I think what we need to do is figure out where it fits with the Node.js site, and when the PR goes in, point back to the minutes for this meeting, and have that one paragraph that says like, here's what we're doing, and that should provide the context that they would need to say, okay, yeah, we understand this is meant to be permanent. Why is it on the site, and all of that.
Yeah.
I know there's a knowledge section. I don't know if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, there's a guide section on the site too. But anyway, we can figure that out later.
Yeah.
So step 4 would then be, I think before we get to a PR, we have to like do like a, I could open like a discussion issue maybe on the main Node repo that's for designing the config file or file-based configuration, so that
sounds like a good way to start to me.
Yeah, like I say file-based config because it's like it might not be its own file, it might be package.json or something else, but then we'll see how that goes, because there's a lot of that'll require a lot of hashing out of ideas and maybe some meetings just for that. And then that can then eventually, and then, whenever we nail down a design, we can open a PR for that. And then, but the design there would have to fulfill the requirements that you have up above in your like DX section.
Yeah.
So then number 5 would be like PR to implement, config design.
Yeah, and I think 1 through 4 we can basically action pretty quickly, and then 5 will wait on 4. So sounds good.
Yeah. But that I think should solve the request. Then it'll be like further improvements like automating the config and whatever else. But we could, I don't know if we need to go any further than this for now.
I think something that actually in there might be useful is, what does that config look like for, say, the TS node or one of the, like, the goal is to be able to run node script.ts. So 1 through 5 will get us to the point where it's possible, but not give us a config that does it. So maybe having something that where we create that config is actually part of this as well.
Sorry, which
well, I think step 1, the first version of this would be the, like, we would just put the config to do it in the instructions, like in the whatever doc page we create with instructions. Once file-based configuration exists, we could update the doc page to, have an example config.
Right. Okay.
And then if we want to automate it beyond that, we could, we could do so. But, at the very least, we would just document it.
Right. Okay. So I think that's the last thing I would add in, is that if we, at least update those instructions that basically says, okay, here's what you put in your package.json, and now node script TS will just run.
Mhm.
Okay, any other next steps, sort of things, other things we should discuss before we close out for today?
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for everybody's time. This I think was very productive and great to have everybody's insights and different knowledge and all that. So I think it worked very well. And I guess we'll see everybody in GitHub. And as Jeffrey said, there may be some additional sessions and stuff, but so maybe we'll see you again soon.
Do we?
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
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 Yeah.